Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm kind of working out this whole Brittany situation and the fact that you can actually hear me, even though I don't think you can. So, welcome. I am absolutely delighted to be on this stage with Dr. Helen O'Neill. She's the founder of Hertility, which, in my eyes, is one of the most important companies that has been created because it's one of the only companies that is making fertility accessible, to actually understand your fertility in an accessible way. Because at the moment, the price to understand your fertility is extortionate to in relative terms to it should be free. People should understand their fertility at a much younger age than they currently are. And thanks to Dr. Helen, far more people are able to do this. So we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of what Hertility is, where they're going, how they're transforming women's health. But we're also going to be talking about a subject nobody wants to talk about. And if you're at a dinner party with me, you're going to be forced to talk about it because it's the only thing I talk about these days, which is we are fully in a sperm crisis. Men are losing their sperm every single day. We've dropped 50%, sperm has dropped 50% in the last 30 years, some data shows. Dr. Helen is going to educate us as to why this is, to the actual numbers around this. But alongside men, women are also losing their fertility at much younger ages. And this conversation, even though it affects all of us, no matter what age you are, it's going to affect demographics. South Korea, birth rates have now dropped, I think, below 0.8. And this is going to have economic consequences. This affects the future of our children. This affects how we are going to be living our lives. And yet it is not on government agendas. It's barely in the public consciousness. And so I think, in my eyes, it's one of the most important conversations this festival could be hosting. So thank you, COGX. But without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Helen. Thank you so much for being here. Let's start off with understanding what is Hertility, because I'm guessing from the kind of name, it's to do with female fertility, but to get an understanding would be fantastic.
Great. Well, thank you so much for everyone who's here, and thank you for having me. It's a really important conversation to me. I've spent the last 15 years actually in reproductive science and women's health and reproductive medicine, just trying to better inform myself and everyone around me about everything to do with how we make babies. And that sounds so basic. It used to be something that was so easy to do, right? You just had sex. And it's become more and more complex because of the social intervenes and all of the social expectations on us. But that is compounded by our environmental surrounding and the fact that we're actually fighting a losing battle with our environment, with our exposures, and with everything that we are surrounded with. So I founded Hertility after many years of lecturing and researching into fertility and reproductive health. My current PhD student, who is finishing very soon, thankfully, is we're looking at a database of 8,000 embryos to see how we can better predict how an embryo develops to better inform and improve IVF. But the problem is, infertility starts much earlier than IVF, and we hope that we can actually inform people much earlier than that. So I started Hertility to enable us to take all of that cutting edge science that we were using in the lab and take it into the hands of every woman, because there's a very strange irony in having a master's of science in prenatal genetics and fetal medicine, a PhD for 4 years, doing a postdoc, running my own lab, lecturing, and having no idea about my own fertility or my reproductive health. And in fact, thinking, I don't even know where to start. How is it that we can be so connected in our everyday lives to every piece of information there is? In fact, we can track anything we ordered to see how close it is to our house. But when it comes to the most profound and life-changing question there is, can I have a baby? We don't have answers. And so in the UK, the current system is quite flawed. It relies on you either going to your GP, whereby you can't, I mean, the NHS is amazing, but it can't really work off preventative medicine or proactive medicine. It's dealing with people who need help immediately, who are already suffering. And so in order to qualify for fertility testing or additional assessment into your fertility through the NHS, there are criteria. So you either have to have been trying to conceive and not getting pregnant for 12 months, which assumes that you're in a relationship, in a same-sex relationship, or you have to have had 4 consecutive miscarriages, which quite frankly is barbaric. And so when the barriers to entry to just simply finding out about your own reproductive health are so high, it really means that we're stuck with the only other option, which is private. So at a private fertility clinic, to me, the barrier to entry is both psychological and financial. So it's very expensive to go into a fertility clinic and get a routine assessment of your fertility. From my perspective, I wanted to be able to build something that enabled us to give someone insights into their fertility and overall reproductive health from the comfort of their home without having the physical need to go into a clinic, without having to speak to a stranger about some of the most intimate aspects of your life, whether it's how you bleed, when you had sex, if you've had any previous infections. And so that's all of some of the information that we take in our comprehensive health assessment to determine what are the possible causes that could be reducing your fertility.
It's absolutely incredible. I've used the service. The communication that you have with your kind of users is absolutely brilliant. It's executed so well. To go back, I guess, to the main topic of this conversation, how it started, which is the fertility conversation is one that, as you can tell by the numbers, it is a crisis, but yet we're unwilling to have it. Why do you think this is?
Why are we unwilling to talk about infertility? Because it's such a personal story. And unfortunately, all of the language that surrounds infertility is negative and blame. So instead of harnessing our fertility, it is a case. And when you look at the language, certainly around women's health, so much of it is framed in a blame-like sense, like she failed to get pregnant, she couldn't get pregnant, she lost the pregnancy, and it's always on her.
Yeah.
And as a result, when a couple is not conceiving and are deemed infertile, we always assume there's going to be a blame factor. But actually, we're seeing that 1 in 6 couples are infertile. That is a huge number of people. There's many of us in front, many of you in front, who are likely going to suffer from infertility. But it's not a simple 50-50 split. So we see that around 50% of cases of infertility are male factor. Around 30%, it's both parties. But the biggest cause of female factor infertility, despite there being 11 listed causes, whether it's your ovaries, whether it's your uterus, whether it's your chromosomes or your genes, the number one cause of female infertility is simply age. We are actually just waiting far too late in our lives to have babies.
And that's a very complicated subject because, and I recently actually read that at Cambridge University, there was a film called The Birth Gap, and it was about to be screened at Cambridge, and a ton of students protested for the film not to be shown. And I thought this was fascinating because I think that women are really scared about that conversation around age because it feels like it's going to threaten the progress women have made in being able to excel in the workplace. And yet I think that we're almost approaching it in a detrimental way, thinking that it is going to take away choice. Because when we talk about the science, for me anyway, we're opening up choice, because if we don't know the actual facts, I think it's leading a lot of women to complete heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I say this being someone who has just found out they have a low ovarian reserve, and that basically means that I have an accelerated ovarian
aging.
And I had no idea that the ovaries is the fastest aging organ in the male and compared to the male and female body. And so this conversation is, this conversation around should we be putting our career before our fertility, is one that I'm personally grappling with. But I also think that this conversation feels one that is uncomfortable because men don't want to even think about the fact that their sperm is massively dropping, and I think that also it's no one's fault. We're actually talking about environmental causes for this, aren't we?
I think that compounds everything. We're still definitely all leaving it too late. I go into the playground and I see dads, and I play a game in my head: is dad or granddad? Because so many of the dads look like granddads. And that's really harsh, but it's quite true. Like 50, 60, 70-year-olds in the playground with their kids, and I'm like, dad or granddad? And I listen for the daddy. But it's such a polarized field, because if you go on the side of the kind of the offensive and you say, here are the facts, here are the figures, here's what you need to know, 86% of your egg reserve is gone by the time you're 30, then you kind of creep into the fear-mongering zone. But if you don't tell people and you don't inform them, you have never seen an angrier patient than an infertility patient who says, why didn't anyone tell me the facts? We recently saw huge popularity over an article that Jennifer Aniston said. She said, why didn't someone just shake me and say, freeze your eggs at 25, after she's probably spent over a decade in a fertility journey just trying to have a baby. So it's really difficult to get that balance of having a conversation where you present the facts without scaring the hell out of people. And unfortunately, some of the facts are dire and are becoming worse. And that's because we aren't actually able to have these conversations. So when it comes to the workplace, many workplaces are now, Goldman Sachs, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple, they will freeze their female employees' eggs for free. And I remember at a time thinking, like, this is a really forward-thinking benefit, that they would freeze their female employees' eggs. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, that's actually pretty messed up, that you would give the signal that, like, we've got to put this on ice. Hold any of those thoughts. You keep working. Don't worry, come back for your eggs when you're done. Just keep working. And they'll pay £27,000 per employee for fertility treatment. Again, it's like, don't worry about that cut. We've got Band-Aids over here. We'll just plaster this infertility bug. And there's two messages that it either gives if you don't choose to do it. One is that you don't value your career. And the other is that you are you're taking risk into your own hands. So if you don't do it, you're careless, and it's not really, it's your choice. And so I think having a conversation, in my opinion, that educates people so that they can make that choice for themselves, we should always come from a place of informed consent and informed decision when it comes to fertility and fertility choices. That's why when we built Hertility, we wanted to say, right, you don't actually have to sit in front of anyone right now and tell them anything about your medical history or background. You can, from, weirdly, the highest number of sales that come in are between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. And I think that's our darkest hour, right? We lie in bed, and it's when people are lying in bed and scrolling, but it's also when all your dread kicks in. And sometimes I just feel happy to be an answer for people in those desperate moments, to say it's actually okay. You can find answers out about where you are and make a decision and get help should you need it.
Knowledge is power. So there is actually a lot of research that shows that men have a biological clock. What happens to sperm as a man ages?
Menopause. Everyone jokes about menopause, but it is a genuine thing that after 35, both your sperm count drops, but also your testosterone drops. And what's sad is that we can't have these conversations in earnest, and we can't have them because everyone's talking about menopause right now. But many men, the most common reason that men will present at a GP in their late 30s is that they have low mood, low energy, they're low sex drive, and it's entirely testosterone driven. So they have lower testosterone, and there are ways that you can increase your testosterone, not by taking it exogenously, but through exercise, through diet, and reducing any trans fats in your diet. And we're not educating men either that there are things that they can do to improve their overall health. The sperm is actually an amazing window into men's health. And it's perfectly indicated when you have kind of erectile dysfunction and lower sperm counts. But what's most important to know about sperm health is that the life cycle of a sperm is 3 weeks. Overall, 3 months from a spermatogonial stem cell all the way through to a swimmer. But in that 3 months and 3 weeks prior to maybe conceiving, you can radically transform the concentration, the motility, the progressive motility. Why all of these parameters matter is you could have lots of sperm, that's the concentration, but they might all be dead. So we need them to be motile, which is moving. But if they're just moving and twitching, they're not really good either. So they need to be progressively motile. They need to be swimming somewhere. And when you look down a microscope at a sample of sperm, there are 60 million sperm per milliliter, with an average 3 to 4 milliliters of sperm in an ejaculate, depending on how many days abstinence you've had. Let's not get into gross details here. But when you look down, it's like literally looking at a subsection of society. There are some of them that are going for it. They are like across the screen. There are some of them that are just twitching on the spot. Some of them have 2 heads. Some of them have 2 tails. Some of them just going around in circles. I don't know where they're going. So it's crazy to see that actually we can improve the overall concentration, motility, and progressive motility of those sperm just through lifestyle interventions and dietary changes. But the majority of couples that you see who are actively trying to conceive, the female is, she's given up everything. She's taking her prenatals. She's doing her yoga and eating her kale smoothies. And her husband or boyfriend or partner is just doing what they want. And it's 50% of the DNA. Like, even though the egg is the largest cell in the body, and the sperm is the smallest cell in the body, it's the party guy. And he does actually have a very significant contribution to forming an embryo and an egg, which is 50% of the DNA, even if that's all he brings to the party.
I thought it was really interesting when you were telling me about an experiment you did looking at sperm of men who vape and smoke and sperm of men who don't.
Yeah, actually, this was the first ever study that was carried out looking at the effect of vaping and men's fertility. And in the end, I never published this. I presented it at a conference. The newspapers picked up on it, where we showed that if you expose sperm to... We did it was a very cool experiment, actually. We exposed mice in air-controlled cages to different levels of different flavors of vape. And we had a control, which is just the humectant, which is what gives that vapor. It's propylene glycol. And then the different flavors. We used bubblegum flavor and we did cinnamon flavor. And seeing the different concentrations depending on people, we saw, you could see a change in the histology or the kind of architecture of the actual gonad itself, the testis. But then when we looked at human sperm, looking down that microscope at the ones that had been exposed to vape, I mean, they were dead. They were just dead. It was horrific to look at. And I presented this and I was pilloried there were the amount of trolls who hit me up. They were like, who is this piece of shit? They really were horrific, like the way they treated me online. I deleted Twitter after it. I went back, but it was so amazing to me to see the vaping community all plowing in behind themselves. And that was what gave me this eerie sense of like, this is the smoking industry part two, where this is not just individuals who are like, there was like a website, Planet of the Vapes, all of these like diehard vapors who kind of came in after this. And I was like, look, keep going. You're saving evolution if you just do what you're doing if you want to keep vaping. But it was scary to me to think that actually I shouldn't have been silenced in really legitimate research. But I was like, I'm a molecular geneticist. I really don't care all that much about what vapors are doing with their sperm. It was just a cool experiment I did with a student. But it does go to show that industries can sway and prevent research from getting out by literally threatening people. They literally threatened me. It was quite scary.
And that also leads us on to talking about how we are incredibly hormonally disrupted in the environments we are all in on a day-to-day basis, from the water we drink, from the food we eat. So I'd love to talk to you about the research that's showing different lifestyle factors that are influencing this dropping sperm rate and accelerating loss of eggs.
Okay, here comes the depressing news. When everyone talks about microplastics in the environment and how microplastics are bad for the environment, they're actually way worse for human beings. So when we talk about microplastics, what's dangerous about plastic is the fact that it's made with very potent chemicals, which when you add plasticizers, it makes a plastic bendy. And the majority of our foods are covered in plastic and cling film and all of these soft plastics. In fact, scarily, people microwave plastic through ready meals. And when you heat plastics, they release bisphenols. That's why you see BPA free on certain bottles, because when you release bisphenols, when you release any of these chemicals, they act as what are called xenoestrogens. You're all my students now, by the way. They act as what are called xenoestrogens, meaning they mimic estrogen. They literally act and behave like estrogen. So the estrogen receptors in our bodies will happily accept them when they bind. And that means that we get this real disruption and balance of our hormones because of our exposures to the environment. Now, xenoestrogens are present in the majority of cosmetics. They're present in all plastics. Many people hear these random pieces of advice like never drink water from a plastic bottle if it's been hot in your car for a few days, and everyone's like, cool piece of advice. But the reason is because if you expose soft plastics or any plastics to heat, they release these bisphenols, which are really bad endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are chemicals that disrupt our whole endocrine system. And our endocrine system, which is our hormone system, is this amazing orchestra of hormones that are released from multiple glands in the brain. Your adrenal glands produce adrenaline, our ovaries produce estrogen, all of these different glands and organs that produce hormones that literally keep us going. Our hormones dictate our mood, our weight, skin, appetite, sleep, sex drive. There's no element of our life that isn't controlled and governed by our hormones. So when you mess that up, it's actually quite scary. But what's more is that it's very insidious, right? You know, the symptoms you're going to experience when you have hormone imbalance are weight gain, you're feeling a little bit tired often, you're kind of fat, tired, and cranky, basically, which the majority of us feel fat, tired, and cranky most of the time, and we'll blame our own lives for saying, well, we're not sleeping enough, maybe we're not eating healthily enough. So it's very insidious, but we do see this impacting overall nature outside of humans. I think humans are much more slow to recognize hormone imbalance and maybe the kind of gender dysphoria this could be giving us, but we see this categorically in animal species where we're starting to see sex reversal in certain animals because of the exposures, certainly near plastic factories in the waterways, because they have such high exposures to endocrine disrupting chemicals.
You know,
the end is nigh.
But, we're going to come and talk about solutions. Don't worry, we're not just going to scare you all and say we're on the edge of extinction, which let's talk about that in a second. But, while you're talking, I'm just looking at those water coolers, thinking to myself, they're in the sun.
Yeah.
And we're all taking water from this that potentially is full of microplastics that's then going to be affecting all of our fertility dropping. It all just seems quite mad. When I discovered this topic about 8 months ago, I now have this like fertility lens that I walk around the world and I just see all of these dangers. And the only way it's going to change is if we are more educated and actually put pressure on government organizations and make these changes in our lives. For example, I'm not sure how aware you are with glyphosate and Roundup conversation. Roundup is one of the most commonly used fertilizers, or something to do with anyway, killing weeds. And all these gardeners around here probably know more than I do. But my father uses it. Most people use it in their gardens, and yet it not only affects our fertility, it also affects this thing called Parkinson's, farmers' Parkinson's, where people are 3 times more likely to develop Parkinson's if you've had exposure to glyphosate. And at the moment, there is no pressure on the government to ban the use of glyphosate in the UK. So we're in these very chemically modified environments, and yet because we are not aware or educated about it, we're not putting pressure where pressure is due. So let's move on to talking about the solutions. What do you think we all need to know in this conversation to be able to change the future for our individual lives and also as a collective?
I think that it's that awareness piece that's the first step. Once you start to become aware of your surroundings, it's a little bit depressing, to be honest, but it does inform some of the things that you do. For example, any products, even if it's shampoo, conditioner, creams, I always scan them on an app called Think Dirty, and Think Dirty will literally tell you how dirty a compound is. So it will go through developmental toxicity, reproductive toxicity. So it tells you the level of and so it has 0 to 10, which is the dirtiest. But when you look at the majority of children's, creams, I bought a detangler the other day and I was so pissed off because it's labeled for kids, and it's nearly 9 out of 10 for toxicity. And I was like, how can this be advertised as something that's for children of all things? Someone think of the kids. And yet when we buy things, we're absolutely sold the dream of like, this is going to do all these magnificent things. But the underlying problem is that we put a lot of different creams, lotions, makeup on our skin. And our skin is an organ that is living, breathing, and eating, and can absorb so many of these things. So thinking of our exposures from that personal choice can actually impact, and making your choices from an informed lens is also a good thing to do.
From supplementation point of view, what should we be supplementing with? Anything that could help us, prevent the decline?
I think supplementation is a very personal thing. My big fear with supplements is the worst thing I see is when I see someone with their hand out and they have their 5,000 IU of vitamin D. They've got their omegas. They've got a handful of vitamins, and they're basically just, we used to say that they're just enriching their urine. They're going to have really, really amazing urine because the majority of it they're just going to have to expel out because your body can't digest all of it, so it all just goes through and out the other side. But the reality is actually we can have toxicity with certain, I'm so depressing to talk to, sorry guys. I'd love to say there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's more about educating and hopefully making some minor changes in your lives. I think it's important to know that the majority of the foods that we eat already are fortified for vitamin D, for many of the different essential elements are fortified. Like the government made a decision in the 70s to say, can we reduce some disease burden, whether it's rickets, whether it's scurvy, whether it was spina bifida, by adding folic acid, vitamin D, all vitamin C to certain foods. And so as a population, we are already supplemented with many of the essential vitamins and minerals. Obviously, some people are going to be vitamin deficient, but when we take huge amounts of all of these just collection of things because we're told to, then actually what we can do is put a little bit of strain on our kidneys and just over supplement. So I just think being mindful of what you take is good, and the majority of supplements should be taken from your food.
For people who are in the process of, of their fertility journey, actively wanting to have children in this moment, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, preconception health. I think everyone thinks that once you get pregnant, that's when everything stops, like the fun stops. We published a reproductive report. It was originally going to be called the reproductive rants. I didn't want to come across as ranty, but these were rants about the state of women's health. And this was publishing data from over 200,000 women who had completed our health assessment. And what's amazing about the health assessment that we've created is it asks all the different aspects about your lifestyle, your menstrual cycle, your reason for being there. And so we get, because it's a digital interface, so you're answering this health assessment, wherever you want to be, and it's not a person asking you about these intimate details, we get really truthful data. And what shocked me the most was that of the people who are trying to conceive, 40% are drinking alcohol, and about 10% of those are drinking way above the national limit, and they're going, I can't get pregnant and I don't know why. And alcohol has a significant impact on our overall ability to conceive, yet we think we should only give up when we get pregnant. But if you think about that wonderful egg preparing, ready, and it's gonna be released from the ovary, ready to be fertilized, and that sperm's gonna make it, we want to give those the best possible chance. And I always think, you would never rock up at the starting line of a marathon and be like, let's go, I think I'm gonna make it. You would train your body, and it's no different to that preconception phase. Like, we should be giving the sperm and the egg, which are in our bodies, the best possible chance and the best micro environment to grow and thrive, and not have all of this cellular damage or DNA damage before they do their most important jobs. So to me, it's about preconception health and taking 3 months, at least 3 to 6 months before you try and conceive, to really get your body baby ready.
The one thing I have also been really thinking about is the fact that the education system is pretty archaic in the way that they deliver sex education. And for my entire life, I've just been terrified of getting pregnant. And yet, actually, when you start to understand this conversation in greater depth, you start to realize how delicate fertility is and what a humongous blessing and a miracle truly it is to be able to conceive and bring a child into this world, given the fact that so many people are struggling. What are your thoughts on kind of how this education around fertility needs to change?
Honestly, the education piece is what annoys me the most. We see almost every teenager knows what contraception is, right? They know don't get pregnant, and yet we don't teach about how to get pregnant. So we don't teach about conception and the fact that there are only a few days in every month that you can get pregnant. And the reliance falls again on girls. We educate girls, and most adult women that I talk to still don't understand their normal menstrual cycle. So they don't understand the cyclical changes throughout every month. That would mean that right at the middle is when they can get pregnant, and everything either side of that, they can't get pregnant. We are taught instead to think that we could get pregnant at any given day of our cycle. And instead of just that information going to us, we're not educating men either. A woman can only physically get pregnant once a year. You have a 9-month pregnancy. A man can impregnate hundreds of women on any given day if he's able to keep going like that. So why would we not, like that to me is like trying to teach the bullet not to hit. Why wouldn't we teach the gun not to shoot? And that is where we fail as a society to educate both parties as to say, like, you can actually get somebody pregnant, but you should have a conversation as to say when you can and cannot get pregnant. And so we have many people who come for IVF and they have this devastating like loss and this feeling like I can't get pregnant. And we ask them a very basic question, which is, are you timing your intercourse? And they're like, every night. They're like, no. There's only a certain time where you ovulate. That egg is released, and that's the only time really you're going to be able to get pregnant. And they go away, and within 1 or 2 months, they're pregnant, and they're like, wow, biology is amazing. And so that, to me, is where we're failing individuals to say, firstly, what are all the things that could impact your fertility? But secondly, how do we just use our biology best? And I think that's the big conversation around the pill, is like we're at this disconnect with our bodies. Our menstrual cycle is the most unrealistic thing in the world. It actually thinks that we might get pregnant every month. So it does that thing every single month where it builds up and releases an egg and hopes that we're going to get pregnant. And instead of us actually learning to harness our hormones and understand where we are in our cycles and say, actually, when I ovulate, I feel great because Mother Nature wants me to procreate. Estrogen is linked with collagen, and your estrogen is peak, so your skin even looks good. Your energy levels are higher. You have much better outlook because Mother Nature wants you to procreate at that time, as opposed to later in your cycle, in your luteal phase or premenstrually. We all know premenstrual, what happens. We all feel like not good humans. And it's because we have this rapid decline in estrogen. And so to me, I think that's really amazing knowledge to know. It's a bit like telling somebody, well, in the nighttime you should sleep, and in the daytime you're going to be able to do things. Like, imagine telling someone for the first time that that's a piece of information they need to know. We all innately know it, right? We go to bed at nighttime and we wake up in the morning. It's no different in our monthly cycle. The difference between the levels of estrogen in the middle of your cycle versus at the end of it are like night and day. And we're expected to carry on as if we're the same human being without any allowances or recognition for maybe our limitations or the opposite.
In my exploration of this topic, I was fascinated to realize that the health industry, inverted commas, in some ways actually makes people less fertile. And what I mean by that is anyone who goes to the gym too much, this actually can be counterproductive. And
exercise, but not too much. Eat, but not too much.
I know it's tricky. It's such a complicated and convoluted subject, but testosterone, many men take testosterone, especially if they, go to the gym a lot, I think. But actually, testosterone was, I believe, examined as a form of contraceptive because it reduces your sperm count so much.
It's still, I mean, the subject, which it shouldn't be, the subject of male contraception is so controversial. I said to, I'm going to name and shame, it was actually my partner. I was like, why don't we just use, at maybe 18 or younger, men should have, not necessarily a vasectomy is reversible, right, where you tie your tubes, but we should put men on contraception at a younger age, reverting to the point I made about men can make a lot of women pregnant, or put them on hormonal contraception. They only have one hormone that we have to tamper with, as opposed to us with 7 or 8 that are all changing throughout the monthly cycle. And he was like, you couldn't put men on hormones. That would really fuck them up. And I just thought, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. We are put on exogenous hormones from the age of 14 and told, here, take this. And whatever you do, don't get pregnant. And it just astounds me, the disparity between our expectations on women who can only get pregnant once in a year to alter this beautiful cascade of hormones that are changing throughout the month and throughout our lives. And yet men just have testosterone, very potent chemical that is probably responsible for all crime, rape, and every other form of aggression.
And I'm not sure how much, because I know you're very obviously, you're a molecular geneticist, so I'm not too sure kind of how this conversation that I'm going to lead into is something that is how much this is on the top of your mind. But obviously, all of us here are probably listening from an individual lens. This is interesting in terms of our own biology. But if our birth rate drops further, this is going to have a catastrophic effect on the global population, our economy, our ability to hire employees. If there's no children, who's going to be the future workforce? And you look at China's economic growth, and that's obviously being massively affected by the changing in demographics. You look at Japan. I think that I read something that says there's more nappies sold to people over 80 in Japan than there are to children because the birth rate is so low. Yep. What are your thoughts on this, and what will the future look like if we do not put pressure on the government to try to support people in their fertility journey, whether that be financial assistance, whether that be, and we haven't really got onto the freezing sperm and freezing egg conversation, which I'd love for you to talk about, but freezing eggs is a very expensive process. I know you've spoken that maybe it's a bit of a band-aid, it's not a solution. But why should that be falling on individuals? Should governments be paying for people to freeze their eggs? What are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot here.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, so many questions.
Firstly, starting I think with the plummeting fertility rates and total fertility rates. So the interesting figures to know is there's birth rates, which is the number of babies born per 1,000 people, and fertility rates, which is essentially what contributes to the replacement rate. The replacement rate is that you would need to have procreated. In other words, there is another version of me that will live till they're 15 before I die. And so that is essentially that you have created a human that will replace you. So the necessary replacement rate is 2.1. So we need to be able to replace ourselves. 2 people make a baby, they replace 2 of them. But the replacement rate at present in the world is actually reversing. So where there are more people being born there are fewer people being born than dying. So we are actually seeing, exactly as you said, that economies cannot grow with such an aging demographic and not enough babies being born. We're seeing that economies are actually really sinking because there's not enough innovation. There's not young people to do the jobs, as you said. And that is a really dangerous thing, despite everyone saying, but there's too many people in the world. Actually, the reality is we need people to be born in order to keep the world alive. Just because there's lots of people in the world, it doesn't mean, the world isn't in a good place. And so when it comes to thinking about what governments can do, I think there are a lot of government incentivization schemes. Places like Singapore, Italy is in crisis level with their fertility rates because they're falling so much. But we have to look to the individual and what are those things that make you decide you want to have a child, but moreover, what are the things that prevent you from having a child? And for the majority of people, it's because we've got to work, right? And we put this lovely shiny lens as if it's your choice to say, well, I'm choosing to have a career and I'm going to make it in the big world. But the reality is all of us need to work. It used to be not even 20, 30 years ago that one person could afford to buy a house in a couple and somebody could afford to stay home and mind the kids. Now, with 2 full-time working adults on big careers, nobody can afford a house. So there's something seriously wrong with the fact that we're actually not choosing, but we have no choice but to work. Like this emphasis that we're all, lifestyle choices. Actually, I think we're all kind of in some form of entrapment where unless both people are working full-time, we cannot get off the wheel. Because we can't afford to live, and the majority of people are still renting and can't afford it. And I think governments can step in from an egg freezing perspective, but the reality is things need to change from how messed up our society is, that it relies on 2 people to be working full time, then to pay a nanny an extra salary just to pick up their kids from nursery. So they're dropping the kids off at 8 a.m. and picking them up at 6 p.m. It's like we're having kids because that's the thing I wanted to do, but I can't actually afford to spend time with you because I've got to keep working to pay for the nanny to pick you up. It's a really messed up phase that we're in that doesn't recognize like the beauty of procreation and reproduction and the fact that children make the world go round.
And one thing I think that this conversation brings about is an appreciation and a gratitude for anyone that looks after children. And I think for many years, and I remember talking to my mother and her friends extensively about this, they were just forgotten individuals of society. Nobody wanted
motherhood
to
is a thankless job.
Yeah, motherhood or fatherhood, a thankless job. Nobody wanted to even speak to those individuals because they just thought, oh, you look after kids. Yeah. And actually, they are one of the most important jobs.
It is the most important.
That is on offer to human beings, whether that is from the father side or the mother side. So I think it's interesting where this conversation, I think, will lead us. I think we are so at the beginning of it. So much of this information was new to me up until about 6 months ago. And then I found someone like Dr. Helen, who has given me an amazing education.
I've ruined your life.
But I'd really love to open this up to the audience and to see if any of you guys have got questions, or to hear your feedback, or maybe how some of these conversations today have made you feel. Would anybody like to talk about their sperm health or egg health?
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. Somewhat adjacent, but I would love to hear more about your company and what the roadmap for Hertility is actually looking like, especially that you seem to be on a really big growth journey. So what's the next 10 years or more holding for Hertility? Thank you.
Total global domination is, I guess, to answer the last question. No, we are really on a mission to make sure that the healthcare system was never built with women in mind. And so we want to rebuild it solely for women. So the idea that every single drug we take, every single medical solution is built with male physiology in mind, to me, baffles me that 52% of the planet have never been catered for. So in terms of our current roadmap, it's about building a very amazing longitudinal data set that enables us to predict certain pathologies and diagnose much sooner than we're currently doing, but having a streamlined route to care. We have logistics for every element of our lives. As I mentioned, trivial things like tracking that thing we ordered on Amazon that we definitely don't need, but it'll arrive at my house the next day. But when it comes to the most important thing of our lives, it's healthcare. Why would healthcare not be so easily accessible, whereby we can ask information about our bodies, get information that is, legitimate, that is founded by true research and ongoing research, so that our goal is to really be a household name when it comes to women's health. That a few years ago you wouldn't get an Uber, you'd find your way. Right now I'm just going to Uber it. And I think anything relating to women's health, whether it's hormones, fertility, gynecology, menstrual cycles, menopause, it would be, I just need my Hertility test or crew.
Hello, Helen, you already know that I'm your biggest fan. I literally, this summer, I made all my friends do the Hertility test because
I'm now your biggest fan.
I had a baby relatively young for my friendship group out of fear, because I was like, I don't want anything to happen. And that was before I knew about Hertility. But the biggest kind of thing stopping them from doing it is the fear. They don't want to have a bad result, and if they do, what does that do for them? And the paying part, people have to pay for their healthcare. Obviously, I understand both points, but as a company, how do you overcome those obstacles? Because obviously it's really empowering for people to have that knowledge, and knowledge is power, and then they can make roads to, if there is an issue, try and fix it. And obviously it just, as a country, we need to get used to paying for some sort of healthcare with the
it's the hardest market to launch in, is one where people expect their healthcare to be free. But unfortunately, at the moment, when lockdown hit, all non-essential clinics were closed. So that meant all gynecology clinics were closed. So at present, the longest waitlist of any other waitlist on the NHS is gynecology, where there are 570,000 women on waitlists just to see a gynecologist. So I think, unfortunately, there's a huge need, because there's a massive burden on the NHS at the moment. When it comes to the head in the sand type mentality, I think that's a personal perspective. I think there are many for whom there was a recent study that showed that 50% of Gen Zs are Gen Zs between 18 and 24, maybe they are, but anyway, 18 to 24-year-olds, whatever they are worried about their fertility. And I think that, to me, spoke volumes, because perhaps that's the group of people who have not been on hormonal contraception, because in recent years there's been this negativity around putting exogenous hormones in your body. So they're potentially the generation who are actually in touch with their bodies and how they feel. And so maybe that natural element of broodiness, there's a scientific term for it, but is actually there. When you think about throughout evolution, women had babies at 16, 17, 18. And to think that in Australia, the average age for a first child is 39, we are the ones who are bending biology by doing that. So I think we do have an innate question about our fertility, some people more than others. And I think that fear lens, to me, I think should be overcome. I've always said knowledge is power. Whatever result you get, you are better knowing now than you are in 6 months, in 12 months, because you can do something about it now. And whatever your chances are now, they're far greater than waiting. And you can always have a baby through, egg donation, through surrogacy. There are always ways, should you wish to form a family.
We've got. We don't have too long, but I know there one, and then we've got to try and do 3. Okay. Oh gosh, we've got. Okay, we'll try and go as many as quickly as possible.
Hi, thank you. Because this has been such an interesting talk, and I'm really grateful that you do it. My question is, like, I guess more personal. What is your advice for people who, like, for example, now I'm 31, and I'm like, the whole career baby thing is like a big question. What's your advice for people in their 30s who are just kind of considering that duality, I guess?
I think a lot. I think there's huge pressure on us to make a choice somehow, and I think I can only speak from a personal lens, and that is that I didn't have that choice. I accidentally got pregnant. Controversy. And I didn't actually intend to keep it because I was at the point of my career, and the morning after pill didn't work for me. And so I now have a 4-year-old daughter, but she's the greatest thing in my life. And I cannot imagine what my life would be if she hadn't come along. And I incorporated Hertility when I was 3 months pregnant. And, we now have a £90 million company 3 years later. So it's amazing to think that having a baby is a nail in the coffin of our career, and in fact it could make us, because there is no greater need to provide for something than what you've created. Have a baby.
Okay,
I think everyone should
we
just have a
don't
baby.
have very. Can we go over? We can't. Oh God, sorry guys. Well, please follow Dr. Helen O'Neill on Instagram. I'm Poppy Jamie on Instagram. Would love to hear any further questions. Thank you so much for being here to the end of the session. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Helen.
Thanks for having me.
Right.